Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello, a very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM. I'm Darren McCaffrey. Get up over the next hour on the programme. We're going to give you the very latest on those extra booster vaccines for new COVID treatments announced in the last couple of hours. Could it be a game changer? But also, as Germany brings in new rules for the unvaccinated, we'll be looking at whether our freedoms potentially are being eroded. That and much more. But first, let's get the news at the top of the hour.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 3 o'clock. A new COVID antibody treatment has been approved for use in the UK. Clinical trials found Xevudy cut hospital admissions and deaths by 79% in those at risk of developing severe disease. GlaxoSmithKline says it works against the new Omicron variant. The government has also secured 114 million jabs for potential booster campaigns over the next 2 years. Professor of Experimental Immunology Kingston Mills says they should help in the fight against the new variant.
We do know that boosting did enhance not only the antibody response to the original Wuhan strain, but also the Delta strain and the Alpha strain that preceded it. So there's a good chance that we'll at least give some protection. So I think there's a strong case to be made for boosting now with what's available.
Scientists believe they've found the trigger that causes rare blood clots after the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. An international team from Cardiff and the US thinks it now understands how the vaccine can sometimes cause a chain reaction in the immune system. It's hoped the findings will help prevent and treat blood clots in future. Germany is set to introduce tough restrictions for those not vaccinated, and they're considering mandatory vaccines from February. Chancellor Angela Merkel says those who aren't jabbed will be excluded from non-essential shops, cultural and recreational venues. The announcement comes after more than 70,000 newly confirmed infections were reported in the country in the last day. More than 100 military personnel are being deployed to Aberdeenshire to help people affected by Storm Arwen. The government has confirmed that nearly 20,000 homes are still without power a week after the storm hit the UK. The military will check on the welfare of those struggling without electricity. Power companies say some people may have to wait until Saturday for services to be restored. A man has been charged in connection with the death of a 16-year-old girl in South Lanarkshire. Amber Gibson was reported missing on Friday when she didn't return to her home in Hamilton. Her body was found in a park on Sunday. The 19-year-old will appear at Hamilton Sheriff Court on Friday. The Mail on Sunday has lost its Court of Appeal challenge against the Duchess of Sussex. A warning: this video we're about to show contains flashing images. The appeal win comes after the paper published a personal letter from Meghan Markle to her estranged father. In a statement, she said that the invasion of privacy is a daily fail and that her victory again cements that the paper broke the law. The Ministry of Defence has set a new target for female recruits, aiming to more than double the number by 2030. It follows a landmark inquiry into the treatment of women in the armed services. It found that 64% of veterans and 58% of those still serving experienced bullying, harassment and discrimination during their careers. The government says the inquiry shows that the MOD has failed women on too many occasions. Forces Employment Charity CEO Alistair Halliday says gender diversity needs to be considered.
It absolutely makes sense that there is a push more to recruit more female, get more female recruits in with all the skills that they bring. I mean, there's been various reviews recently about the way that, diversity and various other issues are tackled. And I think the three services, all of them, are taking this pretty seriously right now to make sure that it is a great place for female recruits to have a long and lasting and fulfilling career.
Christmas shoppers are being warned against relying on positive reviews for their purchases. The National Trading Standards says there's been a rise in criminals writing fake reviews to sell poor products. Government figures show they potentially influence £23 billion of UK consumer spending every year. The Competition and Markets Authority has launched a formal investigation into Amazon and Google over concerns they're not doing enough to combat fake reviews. I'll have these headlines in half an hour. Now back to Darren and the briefing.
A very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM, your fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and here's what's coming up over the next hour on the programme here on GB News. Well, people in the UK might need up to 4 booster jabs to keep COVID at bay. With the government ordering hundreds of millions of new jabs for new variants. We'll speak to an expert who predicted this latest variant in the virus about what may well happen next. And freedom in the age of COVID. What should the rules be? What should the restrictions on our lives be? We'll speak to an MP who voted against those restrictions because they go too far. Are you thinking about cancelling maybe your Christmas party? And domestic abuse is said to be treated as seriously as knife crime and gang crime in law. We'll speak to a former police boss who's campaigned for a domestic abuse crackdown. As always, here on The Briefing, we want to hear what you've got to say about many of the key stories. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, tweet me at gbnews, particularly when it comes to that issue of Christmas party and restrictions. Please do get in touch and we'll get to some of your views later on the programme. But first, let's start with our top story, and that is in the last few hours, another COVID-19 treatment has been approved by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency after it was found to be safe and effective at reducing the risk of hospitalisation and death with people who had mild to moderate COVID infections. It comes after the government announced new plans this morning to offer the British public at least 4 COVID vaccines after securing a deal to purchase 114 million more jabs that could be modified against new variants from the pharmaceutical firms Moderna and Pfizer. Well, the boss of Pfizer has said that annual vaccinations could be needed for years. So how many vaccines will be needed to stay safe, and what other hopes do we have around these new treatments? Well, my next guest's research helped predict the emergence of the Omicron variant, and he found evidence that countries where there are fewer vaccinated people are likely to be hit hardest in this latest wave. Delighted to say I'm joined by Professor Gideon Scriber, who's from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. Very good afternoon to you, Gideon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just on this idea about protection, because we heard from the Israeli Health Minister yesterday that he reckoned if you're double jabbed, certainly triple jabbed with a booster, that you should be protected against this new variant. Is that what you feel as well?
Well, I think we should first understand what this new Omicron variant actually means. And it's a very special variant. We didn't see it before. It has over 30 mutations only in the spike proteins. Now, these mutations are in 2 areas. One area is where these mutations actually increase very significantly the binding to the receptor on the cell surface. This is something that we predicted that may happen. And indeed, it happened here for the first time, that we had special mutations which made a very tight binding to the cell. A second set of really large mutations here are again in the receptor binding domain, exactly in the areas where normally antibodies will bind. Now, we did a very thorough investigation here in the last week with Professor David Stewart from Oxford, and what we found is really surprising. First of all, that we found that one of the amino acids that was mutated in the beta strain in South Africa now remutated, because apparently this kind of variant happened in South Africa in people who had the beta strain. So now it it works also against people who had the beta strain and could infect them. But the other problem is that there are so many mutations now in that area that can resist many of the antibodies. And again, that's something our analysis shows, could weaken many of the antibodies that normally would bind to this spike protein and to the virus. So I would say quite clearly, this virus can infect also people who got vaccinated. But I guess, like it was before, that serious disease will be weaker. So in this sense, I completely agree with the government that serious disease will be weaker because our defense system against serious disease is not only antibody binding, there are additional layers against it. So yes, you should get vaccinated. Probably if your vaccination is fresher, your protection also will be better. So in this sense, a booster clearly will also do a job. But it's an extremely highly infectious virus. We see in South Africa now that every day the number of infected people is doubling. This is unprecedented. What we normally had is that we get kind of every week a doubling. Now in South Africa, we see daily doubling. So we should be cautious.
So quite worrying there in terms of the transmission. You're saying on the efficacy of the vaccines, from what I understand, is that they, in many ways, we're not going back to square one, I suppose. They will still be, hopefully, reasonably effective against severe symptoms. Well, what do you say to these reports out of South Africa? And we heard them from the WHO as well, the whole World Health Organization, that they're seeing relatively mild symptoms in most people who've been infected.
You know, we all know already this virus quite well. People get mild symptoms if they are younger and healthier. Now, the question is, which is the population that was initially infected? And all these infections are really new. So we know about this infection from a week ago. So this is a very short time. More serious disease comes up after a longer time. As we know, 2-3 weeks until we get serious disease very often, and in populations that are either elder or are immune compromised. The question is, out of those people who already got infected, let's say 2 weeks ago, which are very few, how many of them are of the older population? How many of them are immune compromised? So I would say we really don't know much. I think we should wait for another 2-3 weeks, then we'll have better numbers also of not only of young populations, which normally don't get difficult disease in this case, so more serious disease. So we should be careful at least for another 2-3 weeks until we learn more. That's what I would say. I don't think right now we really can make any conclusions.
Do you feel that potentially these new drugs, aside from the vaccines, that the pharmaceutical industry is working on could help?
Well, drugs are fantastic here. So I think in general, the solution for the disease, and I think I said it in your show as well, the solution for this disease on the longer term should be drugs, together with vaccines for the more compromised people and so on. But other people could get treated with drugs once they're ill. Drugs make really good progress. Concerning antibody drugs, one has to be careful. As I said, this specific virus has really a different area of binding antibodies. So at least some of these antibody drugs will be less effective against this virus. Others may not. But there are other drugs now in development that are not antibody drugs, but they are small molecule. And we heard Pfizer talked about the drug. And these drugs go on other mechanisms of the virus that are not changing so much, so they could give much better protection in general. We also make a drug in our laboratory, which actually initial trials showed very promising to be. So a lot of different people do drugs now, prepare drugs, and I'm sure that within kind of not a long time, we see more and more drugs and more efficient drugs.
Okay, and very finally, Professor, in the UK here, we've introduced restrictions again, from virtually having no restrictions in terms of mask wearing and isolation when you go back from travel. Do you think, in many regards, England, maybe the rest of the UK, should go further with restrictions, even with the uncertainty, given what you have just said about at least its transmissibility, that cases seem to be doubling every day in South Africa?
You know, that's a really difficult question because people are really tired of restrictions. People want to have their life. Christmas is coming now. People want families to come together. So if indeed people who are vaccinated and have the booster, their chance of getting seriously ill is small. And as I said, we cannot be 100% sure, but at least this is what we saw from the Delta infection, and that's what we saw also before. In this case, people should take care. They should have masks. They should take some distance, not to be too close together, but still, you have to let the people live. If you don't let the people live for too long, they will revolt.
True, and we've seen some signs of that as well, haven't we? Really, really fascinating stuff from a man who knows this stuff. Really appreciate your time. That's Professor Gideon Schreiber, who is joining us from Israel. Essentially there, from what I read from it, saying that what has happened is the beta variant that we saw in South Africa and was really concerning scientists months and months and months ago, but didn't seem to transmit very easily, has now somehow combined with this other variant, which is more transmissible, and that's the real concerns around the efficacy there of the vaccines. But that ultimately we're not going to go back to square one. We should also bring you up to date when we're on coronavirus with some news coming out of Germany in the last couple of minutes, last hour or so. Quite extreme and harsh measures, must be said, announced by the German government. Of course, Angela Merkel has talked about how the virus has really exploded there in recent weeks. It's announcing new restrictions, particularly for those people who've not been vaccinated. Angela Merkel saying that they will be barred from many public places, including non-essential shops and events, unless they've recently recovered from COVID. That includes things like leisure centres and cultural centres nationwide. It's going to stay in place, we think, for at least a couple of weeks while they reassess the situation. Also, the government discussing with Parliament the possibility of a nationwide vaccination mandate that could be imposed from February 2022. That is essentially that you would have to have your vaccine by February of next year or potentially face consequences. We know in other countries there have been fines imposed. For example, Greece recently announced that if you were over the age of 60 and unvaccinated, you would face a fine of €100 a month from the start of next year, from the middle of January of next year. In Germany at the moment, it recorded, I think, 73,000 cases today, 388 deaths, the highest it's been since February of this year. Angela Merkel saying that this was all about working as an act of national solidarity, while the new German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who's due to take off, saying it's a very, very difficult situation. Do let me know your thoughts on that. Many people will feel, of course, that it goes too far, particularly the vaccine mandate, and others potentially that these measures need to be taken to push up the vaccination rate. Of course, in Germany, it's just under 70% have been vaccinated, which is lower than several European countries, including here in the UK and in France. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews. We're going to pause there, though, take a quick commercial break. After the break, we'll be looking at what the French President, Emmanuel Macron, said about Boris Johnson branding him a clown. Big row between France and Britain. That and much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, it's cold outside. It is December. Here's the weather on the Metal.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things won't be as cold tomorrow, but there'll be a bit of a north-south split in terms of the weather. Fairly dull and damp across the south, brighter conditions across much of the north. Now, tonight we're going to see this weather front moving in, or this set of weather fronts, and that's going to bring some wet weather. And because it is so cold out there at the moment, as the wet weather arrives, there could, at least for a time, be a little bit of snow mixed in, particularly across parts of Scotland, and not just over the hills, down to low levels for a time. It will be mostly rain that we see across Northern Ireland, but as this rain then hits the colder air also across parts of England, particularly Northern England and the Midlands, again, for a few hours, there could be a little bit of snow falling. But actually temperatures will rise through the night, so quite cold out there this evening, but milder air is coming in with that wet weather too. So by dawn, temperatures are back up above freezing. Still the potential early on for a bit of sleet and snow across East Anglia and the southeast, but again, it's not going to last too long, turning back to rain and then a dull, damp day across the southeast, turning drier across South Wales and the Midlands, but then more rain will push into the southwest later on. As I said at the start, much of northern Britain bright through Friday with sunny spells. There will be some showers in western Scotland. Temperatures here 7 or 8 degrees, quite mild in the south again though, back up to double digits. We'll see more rain, though, coming into the southwest through the afternoon. That could spread into South Wales, perhaps as far north as the Midlands. Certainly a soggy end to Friday along the south coast. That rain does scoot away, but then a whole raft of showers come following in across northern Britain into the weekend. It will be turning colder as well. The snow will really only be over the tops of the Scottish mountains, mostly rain at lower levels. But there will be plenty of these showers coming in on Saturday across northern England, Wales. Parts of the southeast largely dry, and skies should brighten through central Scotland on Saturday too, but there will be a cold wind blowing. Still cold on Sunday, but most places looking dry, fine and sunny. We'll keep some showers going, though, across eastern England.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years and I've made lots of friends, and I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends, and you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts, and if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3 every Saturday and Sunday.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing on this Thursday. Thank you for your company. Now, the new variant is obviously a concern, but lots of MPs are also concerned about the regulations that have been announced to control it. That vote, of course, in Parliament on Monday saw a limit to people's freedoms. And delighted to say that my next guest, a Conservative MP, was one of those MPs, Greg Smith, the MP for Buckingham, who voted against those two rules and joins me now from Westminster. I suppose before we get into that, Greg, can we just start with Christmas? because we've heard an awful lot, haven't we, about what we should be doing. Therese Coffey telling us we shouldn't be snogging under the mistletoe and some such watch. What do you feel we should be doing when it comes to Christmas parties in the days and weeks to come?
Well, I think, good afternoon. I think it's very clear that we've got to learn to live with this virus, and that includes actually having a normal Christmas. So many families were kept apart last year, so many normal things that we all do at Christmas didn't happen. And I think the great British public need and deserve a normal Christmas this year. We're in a totally different place in 2021. We've got the vaccines, 50 million first doses, 46 million second doses, 18 million third or booster doses. And I think the best thing we can all do is get the protection of the vaccine, get our booster doses. Mine's booked for New Year's Eve, so if I have a reaction from it, it's going to be a great party. But the thing that we've got to do is protect ourselves that way, continuing to restrict freedoms, continuing to lock up perfectly healthy people for 10 days just because somebody suspects that they may have the Omicron variant of the virus. It is just not living with it as we do with winter flu every year.
But in saying that, I've just been speaking to this doctor who was one of the people who's actually predicted this latest Omicron variant, and he says when you look at the facts from South Africa at the moment, cases there are doubling not every 2 weeks, not every week, every day. There is little doubt now, I think, that this is incredibly transmissible at the very least, and that it may well escape some of the efficacies of those vaccines. Isn't it right for us to be cautious? I mean, it's not that great of a limitation to have to wear a mask or to isolate if you've come into contact with someone who actually has the virus.
Well, we saw the great damage that a lot of these restrictions did to the economy, to people's mental health, to children's development through the first lockdowns that we have all endured. And I accept for the vast majority of people, wearing a mask isn't a great imposition, but to the dementia patient or the autistic child who is petrified by a masked face coming towards them, or to the deaf or hard of hearing who can't read our lips when we talk. Actually, masks can be harmful for many people. It's just not right to say that they're just something that we should just get on with, because for some people...
They're frankly, but they are less harmful than the 150,000 people who've died from coronavirus in the last nearly 2 years. I mean, the government's primary aim in any society is to protect its citizens. Isn't that precisely what the government of Westminster, in Edinburgh, Belfast and Cardiff are doing?
Every one of those 160,000 deaths is a tragedy, a family grieving, friends grieving for their loved ones. However, what we've got to look at is the difference between where most of those tragic deaths occurred and where we are now. We do have the vaccine, we do have the booster vaccine. Certainly reports from BioNTech yesterday suggest that the efficacy of their vaccine is not that different to the efficacy against the Delta variant. There has been a slightly different set of preliminary reports out of Moderna today, but fundamentally, all of the evidence so far, certainly coming from the government's advisors, is that the vaccine will have an effect of preventing serious disease and hospitalisation and tragically deaths. What we've got to think about as a society is balancing the risk. And every year for decades, winter flu has struck this country. We've tragically lost on average around 20,000 people a year to winter flu. And the case mortality rate of COVID now is not that dissimilar to winter flu. So my argument is that we've got to put all of our efforts into the vaccine programme, but not take those steps that are going to damage the economy, damage children's education, children's development, and put some members of our society in a much worse place than they are without those restrictions.
I mean, I get your point about, obviously, you know, we are not back at square one, thankfully. But Greg, at the same time, you know, aside from that grand figure I was talking about, I was looking at the ONS stats for last month. The average in terms of deaths is 15% above what it is compared to the 5-year average. So, you know, that's quite a large rise. People are dying unnecessarily from this disease to a degree, in a sense that, of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but it is higher, those deaths, than in normal times. Is there, under any circumstances, that you would think that the government would lock down again, would cancel Christmas again? Or are you just saying that should be ruled out entirely?
I think a full lockdown does need to be ruled out. And when we look at those tragic numbers of the death rate at the moment, my mind doesn't just turn to COVID. My mind turns to the frankly scary number of cancers that many of the experts and medics and charities believe haven't been detected as a result of the various COVID restrictions that we have had, where people, having found a symptom of a cancer, a lump or something like that, have resisted going to see their GP, have resisted getting medical help because they have been too scared of COVID or because they felt they didn't want to put that burden on their GP or the health service. And so we've got to look at this in the round, on the whole. There are many other conditions, there are many other diseases that are harming and hurting our people, our fellow citizens in the United Kingdom. And we've got to look at things in the balance. And one of the most important things to my mind, as well as getting vaccines in people and defeating COVID, is getting through particularly the cancer backlog and ensuring that we are diagnosing and getting treatment to people who have been sadly diagnosed with various forms of cancer so that we can save and prolong their lives too.
OK, really appreciate your thoughts. That's the Conservative MP, Greg Smith, there joining us from Westminster. I think it's fair to say that the man behind you is certainly demonstrating his civil liberties this afternoon with his rather religious message. Let's move away from coronavirus now and on to France. There was a former French ambassador to the UK today who said that relations are at the worst since the Napoleonic Wars over 200 years ago. That comes after the French President Emmanuel Macron has privately called the Prime Minister a clown and believes that Boris Johnson wants to make Paris a scapegoat for Brexit being catastrophic. That's according to reports not denied in France. It follows the latest spat between the pair, where Mr Macron was enraged by the Prime Minister's not serious decision, he branded it, to tweet a letter urging France to agree to take back asylum seekers who'd crossed the Channel. Well, how bad are those relations? Delighted to say to join me in the studio is our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White. Worst in 206 years, apparently.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think...
I mean, she did say that, but I think she hopefully might have been exaggerating a little.
But I think we are beyond unseemly, actually, at the moment in terms of diplomatic interactions between the two countries. For however off guard he may have been caught, for the French president to be describing the Prime Minister of this country as a clown presiding over a circus and as a knucklehead, to have a pop at the Prime Minister over Brexit, where he said that this all began. Again, alluding to this issue of what they had made public actually last week, this doublespeak that they get from Boris Johnson, where he tells Emmanuel Macron one thing over the phone, then to his very public audience tweets out and briefs out the 5-point plan for dealing with migrants, issues like that. He says that apparently in these comments that he was caught off guard saying, that haven't been denied, as you say, by France, saying that the Prime Minister is positioning himself as a victim. And he said that was true of the issue over sausage wars, over fishing licences, over the spat, over the AUKUS agreement with Australia to provide them with the technology, the know-how to build these nuclear submarines. Relations are pretty tough at the moment, it has to be said, between the UK and France at a time where they really need to be both pulling together to try to get on top of this very significant migrant crisis in the Channel.
And in some ways, obviously, you know, there is a political expediency, isn't there, for both sides, you know, for a British Prime Minister to attack a French president and the other way around. And in many ways, this builds into kind of Boris Johnson's character to a degree. But also, we've got an election upcoming in France, and there's no better way than win a few votes than baiting the British.
Yes, and according to Emmanuel Macron, again in these unguarded comments...
Which was in the French version, I think, of Private Eye, essentially.
Yes,
yeah.
And picked up by other French media and not denied by the French government. He said that Boris Johnson had apologised to him privately that... for the public denunciations of France, that this was, though, a domestic audience that he had to serve. believe that if you like. That's what he claims Boris Johnson had said to him in private discussions. But I think the truth of it is that Emmanuel Macron is just as bad, and his ministers are just as bad. They're all at it. They're all pointing fingers, slinging mud, accusing each other of not doing enough to get on top of the migrant crisis, on top of all the other issues around sausage wars and fishing licences and submarine deals. It's been going on for quite a while. Both sides are at it. As I say, though, the important and worrying thing is we have a crisis in the Channel that is continuing to grow. 27 people lost their lives. And to have this unseemly mudslinging match between the political leaders of both countries, it's, you know...
It's not helpful.
It's a bit unpleasant.
It's not helpful. But, as you say, it is politics. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark White there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, with Emmanuel Macron branding Boris Johnson a clown. GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'm sure you've got a view on that. OK, we're going to pause there on the briefing. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's get the very latest news at just after 3:30.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. A new COVID antibody treatment has been approved for use after clinical trials found Xevudy cut hospital admissions and deaths by 79%. The government has also secured 114 million jabs for potential booster campaigns over the next 2 years. In the last hour, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has received his coronavirus booster at London's St Thomas Hospital. Germany is set to introduce tough restrictions for those not vaccinated, and they're considering mandatory vaccines from February. Chancellor Angela Merkel says those who aren't jabbed will be excluded from non-essential shops, cultural and recreational venues. The announcement comes after more than 70,000 new confirmed infections were reported in the country in the last day. More than 100 military personnel are being deployed to Aberdeenshire to help those affected by Storm Arwen. The government has confirmed that nearly 20,000 homes are still without power a week after the storm hit. Power companies say some people may have to wait until Saturday for services to be restored. The Mail on Sunday has lost its Court of Appeal challenge against the Duchess of Sussex. That's after the paper published a personal letter from Meghan Markle to her estranged father. In a statement, she said that the invasion of privacy is a daily fail and that her victory again cements that the paper broke the law. The Ministry of Defence has set a new target for female recruits, aiming to more than double the number by 2030. It follows a landmark inquiry into the treatment of women in the armed services. It found that 64% of veterans and 58% of those still serving experienced bullying, harassment and discrimination during their careers. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour. See you then.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. Time 20 minutes to 4 o'clock. Now, Chris Bryant, the chair of Parliament's Standard Committee, has today delivered his recommendations for updating the rules and standards that MPs must abide by. It follows, of course, Owen Paterson's resignation from Parliament after he was found guilty of paid lobbying that led to a whole series of allegations around sleaze. The Conservative MP, Geoffrey Cox, pocketed hundreds of thousands of pounds that was found to have done nothing wrong whilst using COVID money, of course, to work remotely for months from the Caribbean. Tory Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg is also the latest to be investigated over his outside earnings. So let's listen to what Chris Bryant had to say in the Commons earlier about his suggestions for changing the rules.
The House has a set of rules and seeks to enforce them because, firstly, all members aspire to a set of values and principles, and also because the public has a right to expect that all members abide by the highest possible standards in public life. On the substance, we're recommending the following: an outright ban on any member acting as a paid parliamentary advisor, consultant or strategist. Secondly, introducing a new requirement that a member must have a written contract for any outside work, which makes explicit that their duties cannot include lobbying ministers, members or public officials, or providing advice about how to lobby or influence Parliament, and that their employer will give them an undertaking not to ask them to do so. Thirdly, clarifying the criteria for the serious wrong exemption in the lobbying rules to make clearer the risks of conflicts of interest and to put an end to this by being used as a loophole. Doubling the 6-month limit on reward or consideration restrictions in the lobbying rules to 12 months. Members will still be able to release themselves immediately from the restrictions by repaying any sums received in the relevant period if they wish to do so. Members cannot be found in breach of the rules if they have sought and followed the advice of the House of Commons registrar. This ensures that members who seek advice from the registrar or the House officials and follow the rules accordingly cannot accidentally find themselves in breach of the Code of Conduct. We also want to end the exemption whereby ministers are not required to register gifts and hospitality they receive in their ministerial capacity with the Commons Register. We want to improve the transparency and searchability of the Commons Register of members' financial interests, to add a new rule to the Code of Conduct, prohibiting a member from subjecting anyone to unreasonable and excessive personal attack in any medium. We have heard the complaints that there is no formal process of appeal at present. We were actually considering this some time before the Owen Paterson case. It might be better, for instance, to have a formal appeal process with established grounds of appeal, which might be more legalistic. For that reason, we are engaging a senior judicial figure to advise us on improvements that could be made to provide greater clarity and to ensure that we are following best practice in embodying due process and guaranteeing a fair hearing to all members.
That's Chris Bryant speaking in the House of Commons a little earlier. We have to see how the government and indeed the Labour opposition react to that. We're not expecting any real movement on it until the new year. Interestingly, just on a side note, while I've got you, YouGov have just put out a poll around restrictions. Of course, we're talking about restrictions, weren't we, when it comes to coronavirus and the introduction of social distancing, mask wearing, that sort of stuff. Well, social distancing hasn't quite been brought back in yet. Interestingly, 68% of people oppose pubs closing altogether. 61% oppose not allowing people to have any visitors indoors who they don't live with. And 56% oppose the return of the rule of 6 outdoors. So essentially people saying, you know what, we don't want many of these rules to come back, though 69% are in favour of potentially reintroducing social distancing, such as keeping apart by 2 metres. So, as I say, interesting views. Do get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Let's move on now, because the policing bill will change to include domestic abuse and sexual offences as serious violence. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, will put an amendment forward in the bill, and it will name offences as part of a new local duty to tackle violent crimes. as they're not being treated seriously enough in some parts of the country. Well, active campaigners to tackle domestic violence, such as the Tory peer, Baroness Gabby Burton, or England and Wales Abuse Commissioner Nicola Jacobs, so they've called for that amendment, though they say that it should not list explicit crimes. Well, joining me now is Zoe Billingham from Her Majesty's, or former member of Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, and joins me. You welcome, of course, these changes. Zoe, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Do you think they go far enough?
Hello, Darren. I think it's a really good step in the right direction. After the murder of Sarah Everard, I think there was an outpouring of concern and anger, a sense that enough was enough, and a very loud voice heard from across our communities that violence against women and girls wasn't being treated seriously enough. And we did, in my former role as an HMI, we did an inspection and we found, quite rightly so, that these types of crimes weren't being given the priority they deserved. And we said at the time that we think that these crimes ought to be treated with the seriousness of crimes like terrorism, which are properly funded. There's a real focus. There's a sense of local agencies working together to tackle them. So the fact that the government is now going to introduce an amendment to the legislation to include these crimes within the definition of serious violence, I think that's really good news. And it makes perfect sense. 40% of all violent crime that the police deal with is domestic abuse related. So not to have that within the definition made no sense at all.
In saying that, Zoe, how far is this definition of domestic violence in terms of it being a crime? I mean, is it physical abuse or does it go beyond that? Because we know, of course, domestic violence expresses itself in multiple ways.
Yeah, it really does. And actually, rather than sort of get tied up on the semantics of what constitutes domestic abuse, what's really clear is previously domestic abuse, violence against women and girls of any kind, so that could have been stalking and harassment, was generally not treated as a real priority amongst police and agencies. So the fact that we're now going to be including within the serious violence definition those kind of high-end crimes, serious sexual assaults, rape, serious violence within a domestic setting, I think it's a really important step in the right direction. But Darren, it's only a first step. I think what we need to be seeing is the government stepping forward and including the definition of these crimes within this, what's called the strategic policing requirement. And that gives a signal to all police forces in England and Wales that they absolutely need to treat all of these types of crimes, whether it's coercive and controlling behaviour, whether it's stalking and harassment. Those need to be looked at collectively and dealt with in a preventative way to stop it happening in the first place, and treated as a priority as well.
And just very finally, Zoe, how much does this build into this idea of making misogyny a crime? We know it's a debate that's been had. We know some within government are not in favour of it. Does this feed into the domestic abuse debate, in the sense that, of course, the vast majority of people who suffer from domestic abuse, unfortunately, are women?
Yeah, the the debates have got kind of conflated, Darren, in an interesting way and an understandable way. From my perspective, at the moment, the police are really struggling to deal with the 1.6 million crimes of domestic abuse that are reported to them. That's bearing in mind that misogyny is not going on the books as a crime. In my view, I think the police need to be given the time and the space to really prioritise those crimes that are going on the books, treating them appropriately, and making sure that victims see their perpetrators being brought to justice. I mean, we've seen shocking figures with less than 2% of rapes being reported to the police actually resulting in a charge. And we've also seen most domestic abuse, 3 out of 4 domestic abuse crimes, being closed down early by the police on the grounds that victim doesn't support action or there's probable evidential difficulties. So my view on this is the police need to focus on the things that are coming through the door that are quite evidently crimes, deal with them well, and then the other broader debate around the misogyny, I think, will follow.
OK, Zoe, really appreciate your thoughts. As always this afternoon, that's Zoe Billingham. Join us there with the latest changes to that domestic violence bill. Now, the UK government has refused a Freedom of Information request to release a spreadsheet showing just how much its landmark net zero strategy will cut in actual carbon emissions. Delighted to say that we're joined by Harry Wilkinson, who is from Net Zero Watch. He's the head of policy there. Good afternoon to you, Harry. Just explain what you guys have been looking at when it comes to this idea of how the government may well get to that target.
Well, this is a document that was a crucial part of the government's plans of how it would reach net zero. But they've refused now a freedom of information request to reveal how many tons of CO2 emissions they would effectively reduce using their plans. So this leaves us with a huge lack of information, because what we need to be able to do is to be able to say, well, these are the plans, these are the costs, and this is the amount of CO2 that it would reduce. And then we can compare that to what's known as the social cost of carbon. So this is how much would it cost to actually impose that CO2 in the atmosphere? What are the knock-on impacts from that? And the US government just this year said that they set a social cost of carbon of $51 per tonne of CO2. So we need to be able to compare the UK government's plans to the costs of those plans and how much CO2 it will actually reduce. So we can be able to say, is this worth doing, or is it actually going to be more expensive than any benefits it would have? And our concern at Net Zero Watch is that we're going to be spending far more than any benefits these policies would have, both benefits here in the UK, but also benefits to the wider world and to reduced emissions generally.
Isn't the point, though, Harry, that the Prime Minister set out, and he repeatedly says this, that it's going to cost much longer in the long term if we don't do anything, or if we don't aim for this target? The expense will be a hell of a lot more in 30, 40, 50 years' time.
Well, this is what the Prime Minister asserts. But when you look at some of the documentation that is used to back up these claims, for example, the OBR cited various costs, but those were based on worst case scenarios, which now look very unlikely. So there's a main scenario that's used in the United Nations IPCC assessment reports called RCP 8.5. Now that assumes large increases in coal use, large increases in fossil fuel use that aren't now seen as likely. What most economists recognise is that we're on a much lower trajectory for future emissions. And that means we're using very inaccurate forecasts to compare what would actually the cost of not doing anything beyond what we're doing already. Okay, as we introduce policies to implement.
We're going to leave it there. You've had your say. You got your point across. Thank you very much indeed, Harry Wilkinson there from Net Zero Watch, talking about the discrepancies, they would say, in what the government's putting forward. OK, we're going to end the programme on this Thursday by going to Scotland. First Minister's Question Time. Fiery debate today, unsurprisingly, on COVID. Let's have a look at some of the highlights.
At this critical moment, we need to continue the success of the vaccine programme to tackle this new variant. Earlier this week, the JCVI updated their guidance, meaning people can get their booster jab 3 months after their second jab rather than 6 months later. But last night, it emerged people who are now eligible for the vaccine were actually being turned away. First Minister, how was this allowed to happen? And has it now been resolved so no one else is refused a vaccine they are entitled to?
So the vaccination programme continues to go well, as I've said candidly on a number of occasions, particularly when advice changes very quickly. There may be glitches in the system, like we saw yesterday. We try to avoid that happening, but when it does happen, we take steps to rectify that as quickly as possible. I think it's fair to say also, I just saw on social media this morning a prominent journalist in England narrating exactly the same experience at a vaccine clinic in England. So these are issues that we are all dealing with right now, but we are all making sure that we are working hard to continue the excellent progress of this vaccination programme. And let me remind people, Scotland currently has the fastest vaccination programme anywhere in the UK.
First Minister had time to check Twitter to see what was happening in England rather than trying to solve the problems here in Scotland. Because while her apology is very welcome and her backbenchers are shouting it's solved, her and the Deputy First Minister are going along the same lines that this was all an issue yesterday. Yet we are still hearing this morning of people turning up on Thursday morning to get the vaccine that they had booked and they were turned away despite having an appointment.
I absolutely accept that for anybody, and it was a small number of people who are finding themselves in this position, that is really frustrating, and I am sorry that they are having that experience. Please go on and rebook. You will be vaccinated in line with the new advice. This is the biggest vaccination programme that has ever been undertaken. That's not just true of Scotland, that's true in every country administering these vaccines right now. It is being administered right now alongside the flu vaccination programme. This is an enormous logistical exercise. I have never stood here and said that every single aspect of this would go absolutely smoothly all of the time. And when problems arise, we rectify those, and we rectify them quickly.
On Monday, well, they don't like it, but let's just go through it. So on Monday, the Chief Medical Officer told everyone who is eligible to, and I quote, book an appointment and get vaccinated as soon as possible. That was on Monday. Yeah. On Tuesday, the National Clinical Director told people on Twitter that if they turn up for a booster, they would get it. And also on Tuesday, the First Minister came to this chamber, stood at that podium and called on the public to schedule booster appointments based on the new 3-month timescale.
There you go. That was First Minister Questions in Scotland. And that is it from the briefing for this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Coming up tomorrow, Arlene Foster will be in this chair from 3. I'll be here at 9, though, with the late results tomorrow morning from that Old Bexley and Sidcup by-election. Don't miss that. Up next, though, it's Alex with the afternoon agenda. But first, here's the weather. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things won't be as cold tomorrow, but there'll be a bit of a north-south split in terms of the weather. Fairly dull and damp across the south, brighter conditions across much of the north. Now, tonight we're going to see this weather front moving in, or this set of weather fronts, and that's going to bring some wet weather. And because it is so cold out there at the moment, as the wet weather arrives, there could, at least for a time, be a little bit of snow mixed in, particularly across parts of Scotland, and not just over the hills, down to low levels for a time. It will be mostly rain that we see across Northern Ireland, but as this rain then hits the colder air, also across parts of England, particularly Northern England and the Midlands, again, for a few hours, there could be a little bit of snow falling. But actually temperatures will rise through the night, so quite cold out there this evening, but milder air is coming in with that wet weather too. So by dawn, temperatures are back up above freezing. Still the potential early on for a bit of sleet and snow across East Anglia and the southeast, but again, it's not going to last too long, turning back to rain and then a dull, damp day across the southeast, turning drier across South Wales and the Midlands, but then more rain will push into the southwest later on. As I said at the start, much of northern Britain bright through Friday with sunny spells. There will be some showers in western Scotland. Temperatures here 7 or 8 degrees, quite mild in the south again though, back up to double digits. We'll see more rain, though, coming into the southwest through the afternoon. That could spread into South Wales, perhaps as far north as the Midlands. Certainly a soggy end to Friday along the south coast. That rain does scoot away, but then a whole raft of showers come following in across northern Britain into the weekend. It will be turning colder as well. The snow will really only be over the tops of the Scottish mountains, mostly rain at lower levels. But there will be plenty of these showers coming in on Saturday across northern England, Wales. Parts of the southeast largely dry and skies should brighten through central Scotland on Saturday too, but there will be a cold wind blowing. Still cold on Sunday, but most places looking dry, fine and sunny. We'll keep some showers going though across eastern England.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join